Good morning. My name is Rafael Fernandez de Castro. I'm the director of the Center for U.S. Mexican Studies at the University of California, San Diego. And I'm delighted to welcome you, all of you, to this webinar on the midterm election, the coming Mexican election that we believe is going to be historical. I'm very pleased to co-organize this with the Tijuana Innovadora and Jose Galicot, the leader of Tijuana Innovadora, is here with us, and also with the Pacific Council on International Policy, and that's why my dear friend Michael Camuñez is here with us. Welcome, Michael, and welcome, Jose Galicot. We have a wonderful panel, I believe the best panel ever, and I'm very grateful to Leo Zukerman, my friend, the head of Oraculus, that I just asked Leo, what is Oraculus all about? It is the coming Mexican 538. Wonderful, Leo, and wonderful that you've been doing this effort to try to have this very consistent polling in Mexico, because this is important for all of us. This is important for democracy. I will say that Leo Zukerman is not only a top analyst, but he's someone always balanced. So thank you, Leo, for your enthusiasm in putting this together. And we have also with us Lorena Becerra, and she's the Pollster of Reforma. She has a PhD in political science in Duke University. We served together under President Calderon. She was doing the polling, I was doing international affairs, and she's a hell of a professional. Thank you, Lorena, for being with us. You've been so demanded everywhere that I appreciate your time. There's also with us Jorge Buendia. I just find out, and I'm happy to hear that he was a fellow at the Center for U.S. Mexican Studies quite a few years ago. He has to come back, as well as Leo Zukerman, who also spent here at summertime in our summer seminar. So welcome. I mean, this is your home. And Kate Bruhn is also, well, I didn't say that Jorge is the CEO of Buendia and Marquez. And you know him, he's been a very well-known pollster in Mexico, and he's also part of Oraculus. Thank you, Jorge, for being with us. And finally, Kate Bruhn, she's a political scientist. She is the chair of the political science department at UC Santa Barbara, and is a dear friend of the Center of U.S. Mexican Studies. And Kate, it's, I would say, her doctoral dissertation on the PRD, and then eventually her book is the best book ever written about the PRD. She's very knowledgeable about the left in Mexico and in Latin America, and I'm delighted, Kate, that you were able to join us. Let me give the floor to Michael Camuñez to make a little introduction, then to Jose Galicot, and then we'll fully go for our panelists, and we'll be asking them what is at stake in this election. So Michael Camuñez, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Rafael. Buenos dias. Good morning, everybody. I'll be very brief because the main event awaits us, and I can't wait to hear what our panelists have to say. I just wanted to extend a welcome on behalf of the Pacific Council on International Policy based in Los Angeles. We are really doing our best through our Mexico initiative to bring a West Coast, Western perspective on U.S.-Mexico relations. I've had the privilege of launching and chairing the Mexico Initiative at the Pacific Council while under my tenure as a director. And on behalf of the council, I just want to thank you all for joining us. And Rafael, thank you for reaching out. We're looking forward to doing a lot more joint programming with you and UC San Diego and the Center on U.S.-Mexico Studies. So good morning, everybody. Welcome. And thank you, panelists, for joining us.
Jose Galicot.
Hola amigos, es un placer estar con ustedes. Déjenme contarles una breve historia. Hace algunos años, James Carville era el encargado de la política de Estados Unidos. Él quería hacer que el presidente Clinton ganara y salió con una frase que fue muy famosa. It was a very famous phrase. It was, is the money, is the economy stupid? Y todo el mundo, and everybody was shocked. It's stupid. And then he came with something else. He said, we have to talk about change. Change is very interesting for the people. We can have people we can say we can go back to our history as did Trump, or we can go to the future, but we have to change. That's a motto for a campaign. And suddenly, he says also that he had to take care of the health of the people, because all United States was becoming an older society, and those make Clinton win. So suddenly it was the economy stupid, but we have the change and the times has changed. We are in a different society. It's the politics stupid, and it's the politics of the left and the politics of the right, and they go to populism, and they in the two extremes they don't talk to each other. Republicans hear Republicans, Democrats hear Democrats, and nobody hears nobody. Or they own their own constituency. Even they have their own media. They have the fake news. They have the things that we have. But what to do in a Mexican election and what to do with the Mexicans? So we decided, and we decided to make democracy the reason. Democracy is the change, not this stupid. Democracy is the road, democracy. So we decided that everybody should hear everybody, all the politicians on Baja, all the governors, and they have to talk together, and they have to talk to the public. And everybody has to listen, escuchar, escucha, reflexiona y decide. Think, listen, think, and decide, and then vote. And when we were involved in this campaign, we find a formidable ally, Rafael Fernandez de Castro, with his ideas, with his impulse. He helped us to do this fantastic trip. And this is very important for us because we believe in democracy, and we did it. Whatever we say, we did it. We brought people like Leonardo Curcio. We brought people like our president of the INE, fantastic, by the way. So we brought people, and we have those events, and we fight very much for democracy. And we find that many politicians doesn't want to come to be listened. They want to hide by their votes or by their tricks. So this is, and I'm very happy to be here because this is the continuation of the same effort, the formidable effort to become democracy. It's not the economy stupid. It's not the politics stupid. It's the democracy as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose Galicot. You're right. We've been doing this series of webinars to make sure that everybody goes that votes next Sunday, June 6th. But let me go to Leo Zukerman. Leo, what is at stake in this coming election? Why we're saying that this is a historical election? Your mic, Leo. Lorena, could you help?
Oh, that's it.
Right.
That's it. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Thank you very much, Rafael, for the invitation. Thank you very much to the center. And the question is, what is at stake in this election is very important because this is, I would say, a very relevant election for the future of Mexico. First of all, I have to tell you, this is the biggest election in history because we changed the calendar of many local elections. And so we're going to elect at the federal level, we are going to renew all the Chamber of Deputies, 500 deputies we have in Mexico. 300 are elected by districts, just like in the United States. It's a simple majority. The party who wins by one vote wins that district. And then we are going to have 200, the deputies are elected by proportional representation. So it's a mixed system. It's different from the US. This is very important because we're going to talk about the scenarios, and it's not very simple to try to get a forecast of what's going to happen at the federal level. So this is very important. At the federal level, 500 deputies, 300 by district, and 200 by proportional representation. And it is also very important to mention that we are not going to have elections for the Senate. As you know, the midterm elections in the US, they change 1/3 of the Senate. Here in Mexico, the Senate does not change in the midterm election. Now, at the local level, there are going to be elections in 15 states for governors, 15 out of 32, so it's practically half of the country. We're going to have elections also in 30 states for renew the local congresses, and almost 2,000 mayors. And by the way, it's very interesting because, and I know Lorena and Jorge can talk about this later on, that in the polls, people are much more interested in their election of the mayors than all of the other elections, no? Which makes sense, no? It's the authorities at the local levels that have more influence in their community. So if you see, this is a very local election, Rafael, very, very local. But it is very important because what is at stake at the federal level, it's the future of President López Obrador project. And let me explain you why. First, we have to understand how the legislative process is we have in Mexico. In order to change the law, we have the Chamber of Deputies have to approve it by an absolute or simple majority of 51%. Then this bill goes to the Senate. If the Senate approves it by an absolute majority of 51%, then this bill goes to the president. And if the president does not veto, then this bill becomes the law. Now, numbers are very important in this regard. At this point, in this legislature, in this Congress, Morena and its allies, which is the PT, PES, and PBM, they have enough deputies not only to change the laws, but also to change the constitution. So at this point, Morena already has the absolute majority in the Chamber of Deputies. Morena and allies, they have the absolute majority in the Chamber of Deputies and also in the Senate. Now, the real question here is, most of the reforms of President López Obrador, they have to amend the Constitution. And here the important thing, I mean, let me review quickly how we amend the Constitution in Mexico. You need a supermajority of 2/3 in the Chamber of Deputies, a supermajority in the Senate, also 2/3, and then they go to the local legislatures. If 16 out of the 32 local congresses approves this bill, then we have a constitutional amendment. Now, these are again the numbers. Morena, PT, PES, and PBM, which are the allies of President López Obrador, they have the numbers at this point to change the Constitution in the Chamber of Deputies, in the local legislatures, but not in the Senate, Rafael. So the minority, there is a minority of the opposition in the Senate who can actually block any attempts to amend the Constitution. And as I told you, the Senate does not change in this election. Now, my guess is that if you see, there is not a lot of upside for López Obrador and his parties in this election, because they already have absolute majority in the Chamber of Deputies and supermajority. There is only downside, not upside. The best scenario for them is to maintain the supermajority in the Chamber of Deputies. Now, my guess is that if they get 333 deputies and they maintain this supermajority after the election, the president is going to be very strong. He's going to be very empowered. And what he's going to try to do is going to try to flip 5 senators from the opposition. And with those 5 senators from the opposition, he will have the supermajority to amend the Constitution. So basically, what is at stake is what kind of strength is going to have the president, whether he is going to be able to maintain this supermajority in the Chamber of Deputies, and then with that strength, whether he is going to flip enough senators to have the supermajority to amend the Constitution. If he has the numbers to amend the Constitution, then he will be ready to make a lot of reforms in the Constitution and go ahead with his legislative agenda.
Thank you, Leo. You cover a lot of ground, and now it's very clear to all of us, I mean, what is at stake. Kate, Leo, I mean, his summary, this is about the power of López Obrador. What is your take on this coming election, Kate?
Well, I think that that Leo is exactly right, that it's about the power of López Obrador, but I would like to look for a moment at two things. One is what happens if they don't maintain the absolute majority, and he finds himself in a situation where he can no longer count on a majority to pass his legislative initiatives. One of the real temptations in that scenario would be for him to bypass the Congress altogether and attempt to govern at the margins of current democratic institutions through a combination of decrees and referendums. I think this would be very negative for the prospects for democracy in Mexico. So that is a potential risk there. And the second risk that I see is in the fact that what the opposition has done in this election in order to prevent López Obrador from consolidating his position is that they have united in an electoral coalition. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that this plays into the hands of López Obrador's narrative about the mafia del poder and the idea that all of the other parties are the same and his is the only party that really stands for meaningful change in Mexico. Mexico doesn't just need one party for a democratic country. It needs multiple parties. And I worry that these kinds of coalitions diminish the loyalties that other people have to these other political parties and therefore weaken the opposition when it comes to future elections. This is not to be alarmist or anything, but this is essentially what happened in Venezuela after the election of Hugo Chavez. The main parties collapsed. They began to try to work together as a cross-party coalition, and the result was a level of polarization in Venezuela that had not previously been seen. And ultimately, of course, we have over 1 million refugees leaving Venezuela every year. So the consequences for democracy in Mexico are significant. And if that worst case scenario does come to pass, then the United States will immediately feel effects as well.
Thank you, Kate, for your answer and for your interesting reading of this scenario. But let me go to Lorena Becerra. Lorena, what are what the polls are telling you? What's going to happen? If you could explain us what you expect about this coming election in terms of the results, and then we'll go to Jorge Buendia. And if you want to comment something about what just Kate or Leo Zukerman told us, I mean, just be my guest. Go ahead, Lorena, please.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today, and thank you for the invitation. I think adding to what Leo was saying, this election, aside from being the largest historical election our country has ever seen, I would sum it up as the largest episode of potential redistribution of power that is going to happen during López Obrador's term. And that's why it is so relevant for him. But it's not only the power of López Obrador and the future of Morena that is at stake. It's also the possibility of the opposition to regain territorial and political strength. As we can remember from 2018, the opposition was practically obliterated with the supermajority that López Obrador won as a presidential candidate. He basically had a landslide victory in most of the states. He only lost Guanajuato, and his party, as Leo said, won supermajority in the Congress. Right now, what we are seeing, and precisely agreeing with what Leo said, it is mostly a national election. And the size of the national election and the states that are at play, I think, make it a different election from other midterm elections. And this has a potential for the local elections, the state and the major elections, to influence on the federal election. And this, in my opinion, poses a threat for Morena. First of all, because the regions where Morena is stronger, which is the south and the southeast of the country, are not regions where we're having the gubernatorial elections. We have governor races there only in Campeche and Guerrero. The rest of the governor races are regions where Morena is not that competitive. And what we are seeing right now, precisely because López Obrador, as opposed to 2018, is not on the ballot, even though he is trying to stick himself into the election every day, he is not on the ballot. So when people go to the voting booth, they are going to be seeing their governor ballot, they're going to see the presidential, the municipal president, or the major ballot, the local Congress, and the federal Congress. But López Obrador is not there. The effect that López Obrador had in 2018 it was a homogenizing effect. As I said, he only lost Guanajuato, but he also had landslide victories across regions, across social classes, across age groups, across gender, across educational levels. Right now, what we are seeing when we poll at the local level, at the state levels in our numbers, we are seeing a pre-2018 scenario. We are seeing some of the more educated populations, educated voters abandoning Morena. We are also seeing gender gap in certain states, significant gender gap, and also an age gap. So we mostly see people 55 and older, the stronger voters for Morena and López Obrador, but we are seeing the younger voters disperse themselves across the opposition. And this is very important because the fact that we are in a local election makes it harder for Morena to have a competitive or to have a super performance like it did in 2018. So up to now, what my numbers are telling us is that it's going to be very complicated for Morena to get the constitutional majority, the 2/3 majority that it needs in the lower chamber, because of two things that I would add. One, in order to get 50% plus one, you need 167 districts out of the 300 national districts, and you also need 42.2% of the vote. What Morena got in 2018 was 218 districts. This was a complete outlier. This was numbers that we did not see after the hegemonic PRI era, right? We mostly saw competitive races. So these are 50 districts that Morena has to defend right now to get the 50% plus one majority. And in order to get the 2/3 majority, I think because of the layout of the competition, it might be hard for Morena to defend those districts. But additionally, because of the local Congress elections, in order to reform the Constitution, you need 17 local Congresses. We have 30 local Congress elections, also in competitive races in many states. So Morena can also lose those Congresses. And one final thing, in the governor races, we are seeing a lot of competition and a lot of surprises in states where we wouldn't see it. Some for Morena, some against Morena, but states, for instance, like Campeche or Michoacán or San Luis Potosí, Nuevo León, where Morena started off very competitive, leading in the polls, we are seeing them go to 3rd, 4th place, or in a very competitive and tight race. Today, we would only see Morena winning comfortably in Baja California, Colima, Guerrero, Nayarit, Sinaloa, Tlaxcala, and Zacatecas. The rest of these are more competitive. Some of the states are definitely going to the opposition, like Baja California Sur, or Nuevo León, or Querétaro, right? And the rest are tight races. So in my opinion, this puts Morena in a struggle, because if they are seeing this competition at the state levels, and they are also seeing competition in the municipal races, then we can see Morena having difficulty in their vote for congressman.
Thank you, Lorena. You cover a lot, and as well as Leo Zukerman, you let us know that it will be hard for Morena to repeat the landslide that they had on 2018. Let me go to Jorge Buendia and see what you think. Jorge, let me remind all of you that, we will try to make this as dynamic as possible. Send us your questions in the Q&A bottom. And if you want to listen to this in Spanish, just go to the interpretation bottom and just switch it either into English or into Spanish. Mariana Lopez is translating this for us. Go ahead, Jorge, and thank you and welcome to this panel.
Thank you. I think that what is at stake in this election, it's the future of the Mexican opposition and of the party system as we know it. I think 2018 was a realignment election. For instance, if you compare in the past midterm elections, 2015, PRI, PAN, and PRD got about 68% of the votes altogether. That is, 2 out of 3 voters voted for these 3 parties. They were the political establishment. Now, what the polls are telling us is that they just have about, in the Oraculus poll of polls, and I will show you some slides, it's about 39%. That means that they have lost, they are just getting the support or a little bit of more than 1 out of 3 Mexican voters. And Morena went from 9% in 2015, and now the polling average is 42%. So this is a major electoral realignment. And I think PRI, PAN, and PRD have never been weaker. That's why it became very important for them to go into a coalition to be more competitive. So that's one very important thing. Also, Morena has got votes from the PRD and from the PRI. But most importantly, I think that Morena became the new PRI in terms of national strength. The PAN is concentrated, I mean, has national strength, but especially it's a strong, it has some regional strongholds, some states. The PRI has a national presence, but it's in a very weak position in most states. Actually, if you look at the 15 governorships that are being contested right now, just with the exception of San Luis Potosí and Nuevo León, Morena is not in first or second place or with a very good chance of winning. So Morena, it's a key player in 13 out of the 15 gubernatorial races. And that's something that only Morena has the strength to do it right now. So it's kind of the new PRI in terms of national distribution. And this is really important in terms of how many seats you get into Congress, because we are at UCSD where many important theories about the electoral systems like para Matthew Sugar, they thought many years there. As you may remind, in single-member districts like the US, Westminster, and the Mexican system, as Mexico was saying, it's a 2-tier system. The single-member districts that behave like in the US, and then we have a proportional representation system that is not compensatory. So it doesn't look to balance what you lose in the single-member area. So it is very important in that regard, the national distribution of the vote. And Morena is in a very good position to get a lot of seats. I'll show you.
Jorge, Ana Paula Ordorica is asking us, and our friend, I mean, how many districts does Morena requires to get simple majority? I wonder if you could answer her.
251. Well, as simple majority as is understood in English, I mean, 50% plus 1.
Yes.
In Mexico, it could be a plurality. You could be the larger. This is a poll of polls of Oraculus. As you can see, Morena has 42% of the votes, but the second place, which is the PRI, it's very far away. And I think this is, that's what I mean with what is at stake. When you have such a large gap between first and second place, elections are not competitive at all. Because I mean, Morena can lose 5-10 percentage points in the past, in the few weeks before the election, and nothing will happen. That's the relevance of the coalition that they did with the PRI, the PAN, and the PRD. But still, the distance is very, very, very large. And actually, we are seeing in some states that Morena has a huge advantage, like Lorena was saying. I mean, for instance, in Nayarit, I think that Baja California can be another example, Sonora. And so it is very important for Mexico to have a strong opposition party. And here I will just drop an idea. I mean, Kate was saying about the possibility that we will go the Venezuela way because of the collapse of the party system. But perhaps we could have a Mexican concertación, like in Chile, where you have parties that were antagonical to each other, but in order to defeat an adversary like Morena, they get together. Actually, they have got together in Mexico. When did you think that PAN and PRI and PRD would be together? I mean, so that's a possibility, but we need a very strong opposition party, because otherwise it will happen that the projection that we have at Oraculus of how the Congress will be composed, you have Morena with 45% of the seats, and its allies, PT and the Green Party, 19%. So they have 64. They need 2/3 to have a constitutional majority. But something that gets missed in the debate is that actually Morena decided not to get an absolute majority, because what Morena wants is to maximize the number of seats that the coalition has. So we have this paradox that the PT and the Green Party are winning single member districts with just 3-4% of the votes. Most of the votes come from Morena, but Morena doesn't want to win a large number of single member districts in order to avoid that the overrepresentation rule. So this is really important. But so the next question will be like, what happened with this coalition of PAN-PRD? And then we have also another key player, and I will stop at that, is that think about the headlines on June 7th. Who will be the winner of this election, at least in media terms? And perhaps Movimiento Ciudadano will be a party that will be perceived as a winner. I mean, if Movimiento Ciudadano wins the state of Nuevo León and Campeche and exceeds expectations at the national level, Movimiento Ciudadano, it's going by itself, so the electoral system plays against it. But it may get 7-8% of the vote, and that will exceed all the expectations. So probably the relevant thing is here that going forward to 2024, if Movimiento Ciudadano will be or will try to be the main opposition party, it already has a candidate in Enrique Alfaro, the governor of Jalisco. So so that's one of the main questions going that will be posed in the media and by analysts, that what will happen with PAN, PRI, and PRD after this election. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jorge. This is wonderful. I know that, so you're not only talking about that the power of AMLO is at stake, but also the future of the political party system in Mexico. Leo, what is your take on the political party system? I've seen that Kate is very pessimistic. I see Jorge being a little bit more optimistic, and I believe that Jose Galicot wants to make a question. Could you make your question, Jose, or your comment?
Una pequeña pregunta. Estamos poniendo mucha atención en la elección de presidente, de gobernadores y de presidentes municipales. Estamos poniendo atención en las verdaderas fuerzas que están surgiendo en el Congreso, que ese es el importante finalmente. Esa es la pregunta para Leo.
Please, Leo, yours is the floor. And then, Michael, if you want to ask a question, go ahead. Let me give a round. Adelante, Leo.
What is very interesting in this election, Jose, is that there are two elections, the federal election and the local elections. What is extremely interesting for me is that if you see the federal election, it has been very stable since September of 2020. And if you see the polls, basically you're going to see the same voting intentions since September of 2020. There hasn't been any major change in the preferences in the voting intentions at the federal level. But if you see the other part of the election, which is the local elections, then you have a very different story. Then you have, if you see the polls, you see that things are moving, and they are moving very, very sharply, I would say. Let's take the case of Nuevo León. Nuevo León started with Morena ahead. The candidate of Morena was ahead in the polls. She made two terrible mistakes, and he went down. Now she's in the third place. Then when she went down, the PRI, by the way, they are not in alliance with the PAN in Nuevo León, but the candidate of the PRI, Adrián de la Garza, went up, and he was the leading candidate. And then what happened is, from Movimiento Ciudadano, Samuel Garcia, who is married to an influencer in the social media, which is a phenomenon, incredible phenomenon in this election. Then he surpassed the Adrián de la Garza, and he is now leading in the polls. So what I can tell you that Morena is going to lose in Nuevo León. That I don't have any doubt whatsoever. So things are moving, and we are here in Mexico. We are trying to keep up with what is happening at the local level. And one major issue, Rafael, and we can talk about that, is how the local elections are going to influence, how they are going to determine, if any, the federal election, whether it's going to be coattails from the local elections to the federal election or not. I mean, I think there is a huge debate about that.
That's wonderful, Leo. Kate, you've been studying AMLO and his populism, his nationalism. I mean, what about if AMLO gets stronger in this election? How he will be, for example, vis-a-vis the U.S.? That's a question that, I mean, how this will affect U.S.-Mexican relations, the result of the midterm election. Michael Camuñez, jump in, because you want to say something about this.
No, I think that's that was a very good question. I think that there's a number of U.S. attendees on the call, and the mechanics of, the dynamics of Mexico inter-party politics are very interesting and very consequential in Mexico. But I think it's important to zoom out and ask, what are the implications for the United States? Kate alluded to it a little bit in her opening comments, but could you all, Kate, starting with you, kind of comment on two scenarios? AMLO, the Morena coalition gets stronger and they get a supermajority in both houses of Congress. What's at stake, and what does that mean for the U.S.-Mexico relationship, either in terms of politics or economics, trade? And if he loses, what will that mean from a U.S. perspective?
Sure. I think that AMLO has surprised a lot of people. Prior to his election, people were expecting a very antagonistic relationship between AMLO and the United States, and that has not been the case. He has cooperated with President Trump on keeping migrants in Mexico. He signed the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement. My interpretation of him is that at least up to this point, he has been primarily focused on his domestic agenda, that he is He does whatever the president of the United States wants him to do up to a point in order to refocus his attention on the domestic agenda. And so the question then is, if he comes out of this election weakened, does that then mean that he needs to take a stronger nationalistic stance in order to build up the position of his party with respect to the election, the presidential election that would be coming in 2024? And I think there is a real chance of that. If he's unable to really carry through his domestic agenda in the Congress, then he could turn to antagonism with the United States as an alternative way of generating support. I don't actually see AMLO as that being his first choice. I think he primarily wants to reform the Mexican system and is less interested in the United States. But those kinds of reforms will also have consequences for Mexican stability, security, and economic growth and development. And the scenario for the United States of a less democratic Mexico or of a Mexico that's not growing as rapidly. AMLO is spending a lot of money that is going to run out at some point if it hasn't already. And that is going to have an impact, even if AMLO is not in the newspapers railing against the United States.
Just to add on to that, Kate, you know, from a migration standpoint, we're seeing the numbers of Mexican migrants moving up to levels that they hadn't been in 10, 15, 20 years. And so I think to your point, if Mexico doesn't grow, that's going to have at least immigration consequences for the United States.
I'll tell you something, Michael. It's not only Mexicans, but there's a lot of Brazilians. I mean, the US-Mexico border is very well connected with the well-being of the entire hemisphere.
Of
if
course.
there's problems in Brazil, we'll look at it.
And the Northern Triangle as well. But my point was just on the Mexico piece. If Mexico stagnates while the US is growing, that'll create imbalances and a pull on immigration that we haven't seen in a long time.
You're right. But Kate, I disagree with you. I believe AMLO was very good and very charming, even with Trump. He has not been that way with Biden. And I will say that, I mean, I believe it has to do with the election, but it has to do with very important differences between the two. For example, AMLO is very conservative, fiscally speaking, whereas Biden is Keynesian. It's so, but we will have a webinar about that. I mean, in the aftermath of the election. Let me give the floor to Lorena. And Lorena, besides the questions you have here, I would like to weigh in and your ideas on the future of the party system in Mexico, because I believe that this is very important for the future, for the immediate future of Mexico.
Yeah, I'm not that pessimistic, although I can say that the opposition has fallen short of many things that they could have done or they could be doing in terms of defeating or weakening Morena. I think that what happened in 2018 was an exceptional scenario, but it was also a signal of how attentive the voters are and how upset and disillusioned they were with the governments of the PAN, the PRI, and the PRD. And we don't put Movimiento Ciudadano in that same batch. For some reason, they have been able to keep presenting themselves as an alternative movement, even though they have been there for a long time, even though they have previously supported López Obrador in other elections. But what happened in 2018 was two things. First of all, this complete disillusionment and a great rejection towards the Peña Nieto administration that was viewed as grotesquely corrupt and completely inefficient. And that after Felipe Calderón presidency that, you know, as we know, left a lot of violence, left a war that has not been solved yet. And adding to all the state and municipal levels, where we also saw PRI, PAN, and PRD governors and mayors doing things that are unacceptable, right? Nepotism, cronyism, corruption, inefficiency, etc. So all of this mixed in to support a different alternative and fit in perfectly into the speech that López Obrador had been moving since decades before about the mafia in power. But additionally, the PAN, who was sort of the opposite, like the option of, like the second option of some voters who were not willing to go to López Obrador, had a failed campaign. And that's why we saw all of these, particularly the middle classes and the more educated population, the more educated voters, giving this super majority to López Obrador. It was actually that segment of voters that explains what happened in 2018, right? But after that, we have seen the PAN and the PRI in their local elections perform fairly well, right? Morena had defeats, important defeats in Coahuila and Hidalgo, Tamaulipas, Aguascalientes, in the local elections after 2018. So we have seen the opposition successfully defend their turfs, and we have also seen them keep their electoral machineries. That is why right now at the national level, we can see a certain scenario, but in the state levels, we do see particularities. And we see, for instance, a great rejection towards López Obrador's government. In Chihuahua, for instance, we see that most voters think that Morena should have a majority opposition. There should be a majority opposition in the lower chamber by most voters in Chihuahua. We see them split in Sinaloa. But for instance, in Campeche, we see the voters saying, we prefer Morena to have a majority in Congress. So we are seeing this collage of different things on different states, because Morena, as their source of evaluation varies from state to state. They're not talking about López Obrador. They are talking about Morena. And in states, for instance, like Morelos or Veracruz or Puebla, we can expect Morena to suffer important defeats at the local level in their municipal elections and in their local congresses, because their governors and their mayors have performed poorly. And they have been very bad evaluated in security and secondly, in the handling of the economy. It's basically Morena where they can sort of move with voters on the issue of corruption, which is less tangible right now because most parties are seen as corrupt. But I think if the opposition performs fairly well in this election, they can build up to, sort of rebuild themselves towards the 2024 election.
Thank you, Lorena.
In here for a minute, because I think
yes,
this is just a quick point. I hope you're right, Lorena, because we know that the local elections are also important, and that people most likely will develop connections with their parties at the local level. However, I do think that this kind of coalition formation is risky. This is not the Concertación. These are not three parties that have ideological similarities to each other and are working towards a common program. They are very different parties. And so the risk is that, in the words of Lupu, they're going to dilute their brand. It's not going to be clear to voters what these parties stand for or how they are different from other parties. And that could ultimately weaken the connections that these parties have with their electorate. Maybe the local level is going to save them from this, but that is the risk that I see.
Yes. In my view, just to answer quickly, I think the parties were already diluted beforehand. It was not the same to talk about the PAN in Campeche than to talk about the PAN in Nuevo León. There are different brands for different voters, and they appeal to different types of voters across different states. Right now, in my opinion, it was the only way for the opposition to present itself as a bloc against Morena. We are seeing 30% of voters at the national level that are strong opposers to López Obrador and to Morena. And I think they're trying to go through that route. So that's why I think it was basically, it's not like everybody had the same idea of the PAN across the country or the PRI across the country. The PRD had already been decimated. So I think it was basically their only opportunity to sort of face Morena in this.
May I just jump in?
Please, Leo.
I just want to tell you, Kate, what about the other coalition, the government's coalition? What is Morena? Morena without López Obrador is everything. You have people from the right, from the left, from the center, from the north, they don't have any kind of ideology. And besides, who are the allies of Morena? The Green Party, which is the most corrupted party of the world, I would say. Well, from Mexico, maybe, but of Mexico, they don't have whatsoever. I mean, they are going to have majority because of the Green Party. No, I mean, if that's not a historical defeat in terms of cultural, I mean, if you have to rely on the Green Party to have a majority in Congress, then for me, you are defeated. I mean, for me, no? And what about the alliance with the evangelicals? They are supposed to be a party of the left, Morena, and they have an alliance with the evangelicals. And you know what the evangelicals, the PES, are in their spots, what they are trying to sell. They are against abortion, against marriage of people with the same sex, with the same gender. I mean, they are the most radical people from the right, and they are allies of the government. So, of course, there is this problem in the opposition, but hold your horses. What about in the government? I mean, this is not an ideological struggle between the left and the right, no? Or this is a struggle between a pragmatic coalition on the one hand and a pragmatic coalition on the other hand.
Thank you, Leo. This is fascinating. We have 7 more minutes to go.
Okay.
And Jorge, I'm coming to you, but there's quite a few questions. One, Luis Maisel is asking, you see AMLO contesting the results of the election? There's another question that I have. Is there any cost for AMLO in terms of the mishandling of the COVID pandemic, in mishandling the economic response to it? Because apparently there's no negative consequence for him. And then I will ask each one of you, and why don't we make another round starting with Jorge? What is your best and your worst scenario the day after the election? Please, Jorge, and thank you. I know there's many questions that we haven't been able to ask all of you, but we'll come back again. We're organizing another event in the post-election. I'm already talking to Leo Zukerman. So go ahead, Jorge, please.
Well, I think that we are moving very fast toward a candidate-centered electoral system. I mean, candidates have always mattered, but I think that right now, this is very clear. That explains the pragmatism of the political parties. We have an electorate that, especially in 2014, changed substantially. And now we have about 50% of the Mexican voters that say that they don't identify with any party. So I think that explains why party loyalties are weak, why they can move from one side to the other, why they can nominate evangelicals, liberals, pro-abortion. I mean, ideology has never played a very important role tying voters and party leaders. So that's one thing. Secondly, regarding that, if you see AMLO contesting the elections, well, that's probably one of the worst scenarios that we can think of, that he doesn't like the outcome of a couple of elections, especially at the governorship level. He has intervened in the state of Nuevo León. He has made statements about that election. And that's a risk. I mean, it may happen in 1 or 2 states if the Morena candidate loses by a small percentage of point, very small margin. So it is a risk because he has the mañanera. So he talks about everything, anytime, and those are not the statements that are very well thought of. Lastly, the question about COVID. I think that has been like the elephant in the room in Mexico, because we have been expecting that voters will punish the government and Morena because of the mishandling of the of the pandemic. But we haven't seen any evidence. Certainly when we ask about how do you describe the management of the pandemic by the López Obrador administration, we get low numbers, more positive than negative, but still low numbers. It matters. But at this moment, the most important thing for voters is the reactivation of the economy. And I think that in that regard, the issue belongs more to Morena than to the PAN, to the PRI. And so it hasn't become an issue. The main opposition parties haven't criticized that much Morena and the López Obrador government. I think that's a problem for this opposition, that you would expect a very negative campaign against Morena and against the president because of the economy, because of violence, because of the pandemic, and we haven't seen that.
Thank you, Jorge. I'll give you one last minute. We will start with you, Lorena. We'll go to Kate, and then we'll finish with Leo. And so, Kate, what are your final thoughts?
I think that the handling of the pandemic is going to hurt López Obrador. I think that's one reason you're seeing some gaps in his support this time around versus last time around among very educated people. But so has his handling of the feminist protests. I mean, there are lots of things that have happened that are going to negatively affect him. And I do agree that Morena is not the world's most coherent party, but it is so identified with AMLO at this point, and AMLO has a clear brand, that I think a lot of these details are getting lost among voters, and that people in some ways are supporting AMLO. And so for me, the longer term question is what happens at the end of the sexenio? How does Morena try to go forward? Who inherits Morena? And what is this brand worth without AMLO?
Thank you, Kate. Lorena.
I think all the determinants of the vote, which are usually insecurity and economy, play against Morena. Even corruption, even the handling of corruption right now, and the handling of the health pandemic is one of the issues that has mostly hurt López Obrador in his approval. But it hasn't hurt him as much as it should have, precisely because I think the opposition missed the opportunity to basically brand him with the responsibility of the current situation. And that's the opposition's bad. I also think that in the future, what we're seeing right now is critical for the future of our party system, basically because if the opposition falls short of certain expectations, we can expect Morena to have a hegemonic, probably the next 2 terms to be Morena's, right? So that's why it's very critical what happens in this election.
Thank you, Lorena. Leo, you have the last word, and I want to thank you all for this sharing your thoughts. We can tell you're the best of the best in terms of polling, in terms of political analysis, and I feel very proud of collaborating with Michael Camuñez and Jose Galicot on this and with their organizations. And Leo, you have the last word, and we'll be back, of course. Adelante, Leo.
Well, if you take into account the handling of the government of the pandemic, if you take into account the depth of the economic crisis, if you take into account that they haven't solved any problems with law and order and security in Mexico, and if they get, as it's the most likely scenario today in Oraculus, if they get the absolute majority, not the supermajority, but if Morena and its allies get the absolute majority, and if they win 8 or 9 governorships out of 15, what I say is they should go to thank the Virgin of Guadalupe and because of that incredible result. However, They were expecting 5 months ago that they were going to win everything except of Querétaro, by the way. No, Querétaro was always discounted that the PAN was going to win. They really thought that they were going to have a great election. So this is my last point. How they are going to feel after the election if they win, as it's more likely, the absolute majority and some of the governorship. If they are going to feel that they lost or they are going to feel that they won. And that is going to be very important for the narrative, as you say, Rafael, in the media of who won, who lost. And that's going to be, I think, part of our next talk here with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leo. I will ask Jose Galicot and Michael Camuñez to close. And basically, if you could basically just thank our panelists because I believe they were wonderful. Adelante, Jose.
Plática, fue un placer tenerla, Lorena, Leo, Kate, everybody. It was fantastic. Y gracias por su participación.
Adelante, Michael.
No, I just echo your words. Great panel. Congratulations. And Rafael, thank you for your leadership in convening all of us. And I hope we can get together. I think there's maybe more at stake in this election for the U.S. than is even recognized. I think the business climate in Mexico is deteriorating. The relationship, while the trade relationship is strong, it's going to be an interesting road ahead. So I look forward to reconvening with you, Rafael, and all of you, our panelists. Thank you so much for a great presentation, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you all. Un abrazo para todos. Gracias de corazón.